right, welcome into Surviving Paradise, the podcast that takes a sometimes serious, oftentimes humorous look at the claim of the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses that they're living in a modern-day spiritual paradise. I'm back. I'm your host, Stacy Bauman, former elder, ministerial servant, and a kid raised as a Jehovah's Witness in the 70s and 80s. As I like to do, just a warning, we try to have some fun here. We also try to heal, somewhat try to be educational in each episode. Just note that all sarcasm, humor, and more is never meant to offend. Strictly my glowing personality coming out in my own thoughts. Maybe never more so than this week. And wow, do we have something in store. I'm hoping all those parents out there found time to throw away their baby pacifiers after our last episode of Jehovah's Witness Greatest Hits Grab Bag, where the faithful and discreet slave informed us that your baby's binky was really making them seriously sick. Another example of how Jesus missed a few important things during his only visit to earth back in the day. Pacifiers and binkies and stuff. But I'm sure we're all thankful that information got corrected during the 20th century by his anointed guys. Stay tuned for incoming new light for suckling babies. Anything could happen at any moment. And just a reminder, this organization is not, and I repeat, not, run by men. Not at all. Allegedly. Well, it's that time again. Time for food from heaven via the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses. While the rest of the planet preps for Halloween this week and all the cute little kids running around in costume, the planet's only true religion is back in front of the camera, ready to prove Satan a liar. We're going to take a look at my version of the highlights of the 2025 October JW broadcast, hosted by brother Seth Hyatt, who spends his day as a helper to the service committee. Following his brief preview and the nifty jingle that opens every JW broadcast, Seth Hyatt pulls us immediately into the discussion by asking the question, quote, "What do you think? Is it possible for an imperfect human to elevate his or her thinking, to agree with God's thinking? And if so, how can we do this?" End quote. Okay. I see what you did there, Brother Hyatt. It looks like you just answered your own question, a tried and true thing that happens inside of Jehovah's Witnesses. And frankly stated, I was hooked immediately. You got me, Brother Hyatt. Anyone who regularly listens to this crazy show knows that thinking and all things cognition, emotion, motivation, and brain stuff, well, it's all of great interest to me personally. So, wow, Seth, I love that the guy who is the helper to the service committee started with something they constantly teach Jehovah's Witnesses to do at every weekly service meeting. You remember, it's a strategy. Ask your householder or your audience a viewpoint question. Quote, "What do I think?" End quote. I love it. Thanks for asking, Seth. He just invited us all to express how we think about everything he says next. And wouldn't you know it, I do actually have a few thoughts on the 2025 October JW broadcast, one that undoubtedly will be pointed to in the future in publications and stuff as fulfilling some wild prophecy in Nahum, or maybe in Obadiah. Ah, hell. Maybe Seth Hyatt is fulfilling another monster creature prophecy from Revelation. Who knows? Let's find out. The theme this month looks to be matching our thinking with Jehovah's thinking. It's all about thinking like Jehovah. And to say I started laughing when he said this, it's an understatement. And immediately he blows my idea out of the water by saying the Bible book of Isaiah. Oh man, I was hoping for a minor prophet. I don't know. That Isaiah is going to give us the answers. So maybe this broadcast is a prophetic fulfillment of some verses in Isaiah. Let's find out again. He takes us to Isaiah chapter 40, verses 12 through 14 of the New World Translation, which says this, quote, "Who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand, and taken the measurements of the heavens with a span of his hand? Who has gathered in a measure the dust of the earth, or weighed the mountains in the balances, and the hills in the scales? Who has taken the measurements of the Spirit of Jehovah, and who could instruct him as his advisor? With whom did he consult to gain understanding? Or who teaches him in the path of justice? Or teaches him knowledge? Or shows him the way of true understanding?" End quote. Isaiah 40, 12 through 14. Seth finishes up by asking the audience what we learn from these verses. And in summary, I'm going to make it easy. Jehovah knows everything. Jehovah knows everything. You can't tell him anything he doesn't already know, except for that time he lost Adam and Eve in the garden and wondered where they were. We won't go there. You can't tell him anything he doesn't already know. And that includes what he knows even about you and I. Each of us is imperfect humans. As Seth Hyatt says, Jehovah's thinking is elevated. That comes up a lot in this broadcast. Jehovah's thinking is elevated. Elevated thinking over and over. And look, candidly from the outset, you're on this journey with me, so you're going to have to bear with me if you keep tuned into this episode. I can't help but wonder why the God that knows all about the mountains, hills, and is in need of no advisors, no teachers, or any understanding is the same God that allows his only organization on earth to teach the wrong thing for decades. Why? I know that makes Peemies really uncomfortable if you're bravely here. But if Jehovah is all-knowing and consults no one and can learn nothing, why did he let his son Jesus hand the wrong doctrines and teachings down to the governing body, who then taught anyone that would listen the wrong thing for many, many decades until Jesus went, oopsie, time for some new light? I'm just trying to get on board with Seth Hyatt here and adjust my thinking to Jehovah's way of elevated thinking, so I can tell my kids that it's okay to play with fire, then decide it isn't a good idea after all when they get burned down the road. Am I alone on this? Am I the only one who went there that happened to watch this broadcast? Jehovah can't be taught anything, but he likes to teach the wrong thing for a long time. And for many Jehovah's Witnesses still on the fence, they are going to move past the discomfort of shaving for over a century, or feeling embarrassed at that company party when they couldn't raise and toast their glasses, or even reason that they missed out on college, but probably avoided a few orgies along the way. So it worked out. It all worked out. But folks, the all-knowing, all-wise Jehovah that we are learning about this month and his elevated thinking, well, he also published this from the Dutch edition of the Consolation magazine, known as The Awake Today, published by Jehovah's Witnesses in September 1945, page 16. This is what the all-wise elevated thinking of Jehovah was pushing. Quote, "When we lose our life because we refuse inoculations, that does not regulations which prohibit the use of drugs, inoculations, or blood transfusions. It is an invention of people who, like the Pharisees, leave Jehovah's mercy and love aside End quote. Let's rub my eyes for a minute. Wait a minute. What? Wait. The God whose thinking we need to align with was saying that blood transfusions were actually a good idea in 1945? He endorsed it. In fact, he went on to say that we don't want to be like the Pharisees and refuse something like a blood transfusion that could save your life. It's of no benefit to his name. Yeah. And I add some gravity to that and just say, yep. Ask a Jehovah's Witness if they know this, and they'll just claim you and I are lying. We're apostates, even though it's in print. In fact, the very God Seth Wyatt is about to say we need to think like, we need to emulate, was himself endorsing blood transfusions and saying that was part of his mercy and love. In fact, Jehovah's Witnesses were encouraging and accepting blood transfusions for almost 80 years before Jehovah, and his elevated thinking decided to start disfellowshipping people that took a transfusion in the 1950s. So, just imagine, a modern Jehovah's Witness will tell you that chin hair is no longer a big deal, and that a 21-year-old elder gave them some good advice once that changed their life. But they will then go on to ignore that Jehovah's elevated thinking went from encouraging blood transfusions to requiring people to die in the 1950s. Dead. But I digress. This is immediately where my mind went when I realized that Seth Hyatt during this broadcast was going to be encouraging me to think like Jehovah this month. And now a question for Brother Hyatt and his bosses. Which version of Jehovah should I be thinking like? Which version? Old Testament, New Testament? The one who says blood transfusions are a good idea? The one who lets people die? The one with common sense, or the one that lets sick people die on a table rather than take the very fluid he made for us? The insanity comes fast on JW Broadcasting, folks. But let's let Seth carry on. We all want to think like Jehovah, after all. Just not sure which version of Jehovah that is. Let's see if he answers that. He continues by telling us that Jehovah is not inaccessible, and neither is his thinking. Is he sure? Of course, if you want to see how Jehovah used to think, you can just forget it, folks. You see, Jehovah's thinking is no longer available on the Watchtower Library prior to, would you look at that, the 1950s for the Watchtower. You mean before or the 1970s for the Awake. You also won't find Jehovah thinking in his own house, otherwise known to witnesses as a kingdom hall. Elders were told to destroy his thoughts a few years ago. You might remember. Throw those books away. You see, a Jehovah's Witness today has to seek out an apostate to see how Jehovah used to think, back then. Oh, and if you're wondering at this point why Jehovah's thinking includes a Watchtower Study Edition, but it also has a secondary public edition, so am I. Does Jehovah think two separate thoughts? One for the public, one for Jehovah's people? Wait a minute here. I was raising my hand to ask Seth Hyatt. He couldn't see me. He wouldn't call on me. Kind of like my last few Watchtower studies. But Seth keeps on keeping on. And he says that Isaiah paints a simple and prophetic picture, does it now? And takes us back to Isaiah 2, verse 2 of the New World Translation, where he reads, quote, In the final part of the days, the mountain of the house of Jehovah will become firmly established above the top of the mountains, and it will be raised above the hills, and to it all the nations will stream. End quote. But the fun part is when he stops mid-verse, mid-read, to say, quote, as the footnote says about the final days, that is the last days. That is in these days, the time in which you and I are living, end quote. The video even shows them adding in the words the last days to the Bible verse in parentheses on screen. Something the Bible itself did not say. And witnesses are watching and their heads are bobbing. Yeah, sure. But at least they're consistent, right? He goes where we all knew he was going by reading this verse. I know. What is this mountain he speaks of? I'll bet you can guess. Say it out loud. Of course, it's all surrounding Jehovah's pure worship, available only through the organization. And it will be readily available and evident, says Seth, during these last days. He continues to say people will be flooding, knocking each other over. You remember, like back when you were saving seats at the district convention, they'll be running to this mountain. Want to guess who or what the mountain is? Yeah, I already said it. But then Seth Hyatt goes full dumpster fire. And admittedly, I was roaring. He wants us to imagine what it means to climb a mountain. Oh yes. You will be tired, he says. You will fall down and you may even get injured. On Jehovah's mountain? Wow. But when you get to the top, you have what he says is an incredible view. And then he ties in that theme. He says, quote, you're elevated and our thinking will be in harmony with Jehovah's thoughts, end quote. He goes on to roll out a nameless person's experience and states that this woman, this brings back so many triggering memories, these experiences. Nameless person, man, did she really lose the lottery. This woman who rode into the society to bear her private sins apparently told the Watchtower that she has venereal diseases, multiple, that she was a drunk and a drug dealer. But Seth goes on to tell us she climbed that mountain and now she is elevated by matching Jehovah's thoughts. We can all be just like the nameless woman by climbing Jehovah's spiritual mountain, and then he hits us with the message that this organization really wants to get across to Jehovah's Witnesses in this broadcast. He says the following, quote, one more reminder. If we abandon Jehovah's standards, we quickly lose our elevated standing and perspective. So it's important to hold tightly to Jehovah's elevated way of doing things, even when it's not easy to do so. End quote. Long pause. Quote, but what if we do make a serious mistake, become involved in serious wrongdoing? We lose altitude. Oh, he's tying in that mountain thing from Isaiah. Got it. It's like a free fall at the time. End quote. A free fall. Stay in line with the organization as you climb the mountaintop. Pretty simple. We get it, Seth. He goes on then to spend a few minutes digging into Isaiah 55 and how Jehovah's thoughts are so much more elevated than we lowly sinners. And for all those Jehovah's Witnesses that have left the organization out there, you don't need to feel like a lost cause. Jehovah wants us back, folks. Jehovah wants us back. You just need to think like he does. Seth goes on to reference the August 2024 Watchtower article on Jehovah's mercy for serious sinners. You might incidentally remember this one. It had a scene from the prodigal son on the cover of the Watchtower. It was kind of, I guess we could call it kind of landmark. But it ironically is the scene from the parable where the father is running out to his son to greet him as he comes up from a distant land up the sidewalk. Something I might add that Seth seems to gloss over: Jehovah's Witnesses are not allowed to do with sinners, and that the governing body clearly doesn't understand about this parable. Don't speak to your own kids if they're disfellowshipped. Nonetheless, he quotes the information regarding the evil sinner in the Corinth congregation and makes his point by saying that this guy had fallen so far down the mountain that he was doing naughty things that even the worldly nations wouldn't do. And yep, back to my mind, I'm sorry, I wondered if he meant how even non-Jehovah's Witnesses report that those who commit child abuse to the authorities, they actually report it. Does he mean like that? Even non-JWs know to protect kids. Even as Jehovah's Witnesses, particularly the elders, are told that it's optional to tell the authorities about a child harmed and are even discouraged from doing so. Does he mean like that? Like those naughty nations? I mean, I'm fairly certain if I asked my next door neighbor, who is a non-Jehovah's Witness, what he would do about someone harming kids, I gotta tell you, I'm gonna get a concrete answer. He's gonna tell the authorities, but look, he's a man of the nations. Just like this bad guy in the congregation in Corinth, he must be shunned. Okay, let's jump back to the wisdom of Seth Hyatt and his bosses. He then says something very interesting to me. It stood out. He goes on to say that Paul told the elders to disfellowship the man, but then adds, quote, but perhaps only months later, to kindly forgive and comfort the man, to confirm their love for him. Why? The discipline had yielded positive results. End quote. Did it now? Did it? The discipline, they shunned this guy. You'll note that it said only a couple months, not a year. Remember the rule? Where's my former elders? A couple months, and this seems to be a bit of a change, folks. A bit of a change as they're getting in trouble in country after country after country. See France, see Norway. Yeah. But the comment that the discipline, the shunning, had yielded positive results, I guess I have a question there. It did? How do they know? How do they know? Were the guys in the Jerusalem congregation, were they able to, or Corinth, excuse me, were they able to read hearts back in the first century? Did he do a good job sitting in the back row at the synagogue each week? Did he come with an underlined Torah to each meeting? How did this shunning that only lasted a couple months, how did it yield results? How? I mean, putting an adult in a timeout even before we had working toilets had to be a very effective way to discipline someone. And evidently had obvious positive results, according to Seth Hyatt. He goes on to say, quote, what a beautiful example of Jehovah's elevated thinking, end quote. Well, I'm only speaking for me, but taking just a couple minutes to dwell on his own son's story of the prodigal son. You know, Seth, the one pictured on the front of this same watchtower you're quoting from. I'm pretty sure I know how God thinks about people who make big mistakes and feel bad about it and change. I think I see it. I'm still looking for the father putting his grown son in a timeout and sitting out in the pig pen while the family eats dinner and, of course, pretending that his son's dead, even though he's just a few feet away, like disfellowship people are treated in kingdom halls. Oh, wait, wait a minute. I'm looking at the I can read in the Bible. I'm looking at the cover of his own watchtower. Wait a minute. The father's running out and hugging him and giving him new clothes and even putting jewelry on him. Wait a second. I'm once again really confused about how Jehovah thinks. Is this elevated thinking? Do we do it your way or their way? I got the Bible saying this, but I got Seth Hyatt and his overlords and over 40 years as a Jehovah's Witness and an elder saying something completely different. Who should I think like again? Who? Let me help anyone wondering what he's talking about. They want Jehovah's Witnesses that gave up on this organization or did something wrong or realized exactly what it is and left. They are now asking them to come back. They're making it as attractive as possible. Jehovah loves you. You just have to think like he does. And they're doing this because they're hemorrhaging members, particularly younger generations that see through all of this. And with that, I just want to say, look at that. I can think like Jehovah too, because that's what he did with the prodigal son. Just come on back. I'll give you a hug. That's not what happens in Jehovah's Witnesses. So, Seth, we have a bit of a paradox here. And listen, I've shared this before on this silly show, but I'm always reminded of my own personal experience as an elder. I was the chairman on far too many judicial committees, and they hurt. Let me tell you, they truly, truly suck. And if you're a guy that enjoys watching other people in pain or squirm, there is something incredibly wrong with you, because judicial meetings are awful, especially as a male dealing with a vulnerable female. It's bad, and I mean real bad. But it was during one such judicial meeting that I had one of my first aha moments. Aha. Once the judicial meeting was over and the person had left the Kingdom Hall, the three of us elders were sitting back talking. I was apparently noticeably quiet. One of the other elders asked me what was wrong, and it jolted me back into the room, into the moment. I looked at him and the other elder, and I asked them this: what does a person most fear when they walk into this room with the three of us? It kind of hung in the air. The other elder answered. He said, well, probably that there's a good chance they're going to be disfellowshipped. And I looked at him, and after a long pause, I said, yeah, they're afraid of us. They're afraid of us. They're not afraid of Jehovah. They're not in this room to make things better. They are afraid of the three of us and what we may do to them. And I'll never forget it. I know what I was wearing and the whole bit. I got up and I walked out of the Kingdom Hall. The point being here that there is nothing spiritual about Jehovah's Witness judicial committees, no matter what he says about elevated thinking in this broadcast. If you want to get naked with another consenting adult, feel bad about it, and then say you're sorry to, I don't know, the only person who can forgive you, the invisible guy upstairs, your creator, it should not have anything to do with other people. And it was at this point that some of the light bulbs started going off in my head. There is absolutely nothing spiritual about the Jehovah's Witness disciplinary process. And if you think I'm full of it or an apostate, I'm going to point you to your own book, The Prodigal Son. I have a whole episode on this, one of my favorites. It's been a year or two ago. Go find it if you're interested. The Prodigal Son blows all of this out of the water. And it was a big moment for me, despite this broadcast in October. The truth is this: Jehovah's Witnesses are afraid of men. and men make them afraid of Jehovah. That's it. But from the "you just can't make this up" department, Seth Hyatt in this broadcast returns to the prodigal son to tell us that some in the modern day organization of Jehovah's Witnesses don't like to welcome back serious sinners, just like the older brother in Jesus' famous parable, the prodigal son. And I wanted to put my arm around Seth and say, hey, can we give you some help with this little story? Can we give you some help? He goes on a diatribe, I'm not going to repeat, about how many Jehovah's Witnesses feel slighted and that Jehovah has failed us, but telling us to once again treat as a brother someone that may have hurt us with their own sins. Somebody's hurt us and Jehovah wants me to forgive him? What? No, I'm like the older son and the prodigal son. Skipping the rest of the story. He then asked the crowd into the camera, quote, what can help us to have Jehovah's elevated view? End quote. And folks, then he does it. He does the unthinkable. I wish I was making this up, but in the holy book known as the Bible, filled with hundreds, if not possibly thousands of different characters, Seth Hyatt chooses to teach us what to do to get Jehovah's elevated thinking by pointing us to King David. And I shot coffee out my nose, which has happened before on this show. What's a guy got to do to get my guy Noah into the JW broadcast? I mean, he gets naked, he got hammered drunk, and he cursed his own kid. Can he at least get a cameo? No, not this month. Okay. We're going with King David. We're now going to talk about the illustrious, high character, man after Jehovah's heart, King David again, to get Jehovah's elevated thinking. And look, this is way too much fun for me. It's truly some of the funniest stuff that these men do in this organization. And I'm going to say it at some point when I'm in a mood, I'm going to do a King David episode on this show. Noted. But I just recently thrown him into a few shows because they love King David, kind of like my guy Noah. He has a rather interesting life when you're comparing it to Jehovah's elevated thinking, how to treat sinners and how to forgive those that have hurt us that might get reinstated to the congregation. And that's all Seth Hyatt's trying to do by pointing to King David. Seth and his bosses in upstate New York, they're not the most creative bunch. And when it comes to sin and getting Jehovah's thinking, even on very serious sins, here's your guy, King David. But here's why I think it's so funny. Good old King David may have been good with a slingshot and how to handle bullies. But look, you've got a Bible. Open it. His entire life is a long, long list of sins that include getting innocent people maimed, tortured, killed, and even forgotten. And that includes women, children, and even innocent farm animals. King David is one giant bad decision in the Bible. But it also says he was a guy after Jehovah's heart, even as he chose to let Jehovah kill 70,000 innocent people for something he himself did. But repentance and stuff, according to Seth Hyatt, and he's going to teach us something. I recently shared a very disturbing story from the pages of the Bible about King David, where they went out and found him a hot virgin girl to, as the Bible says, cuddle with him at night. I mean, this guy? Really? Are you serious? I don't think there's another character in the entire Bible with the resume of serious sins like King David. And folks, That's Seth Hyatt's point. He wants us all to forgive these people that they desperately want to come back to Jehovah's Witnesses. That's the whole point here. But Seth Hyatt does what the governing body always does. He focuses on just one of David's many serious, deadly sins. And it's their favorite sin by David. It's the sex sin. Oh, no. You know, the one where he stalks another man's wife, watches her take baths. You might know her as Bathsheba. Why do they do this? Because the governing body thinks that sex, adultery, fornication, getting naked, and everything that comes with it, it is the ultimate sin. It's the worst sin. They're sex obsessed, so they love this one. It's not killing people. It's not babies dying. It's not even hurting handicapped people. David did that too. Nope, it's sex. How does one ever come back from sex? All sexual mistakes are the ultimate in evil to Jehovah's Witnesses. So here we are back at one of their favorite ones, David and Bathsheba. And they get a lot of mileage out of these two. We got murder, we got a baby dying, but they like to focus on them getting naked. And Seth Hyatt is going to show all of us alleged perverts that we need Jehovah's elevated thinking, and we need to come back to the organization where people will freely forgive us, even the people that were victims of your sexual sins or other things. I'm going to summarize Seth Hyatt in this point of the broadcast and the Bible itself here. Comically, and at least that's my opinion, the God that helped my guy Noah build an ark before he even had a head count of who should get on it, the God that conversed with Abraham and had some arguments, the God who seemed to look away when Lot slept with his own two daughters, the God that spoke to Moses from a burning bush and more, well, that same God with the elevated thinking sends a guy named Nathan to tell King David a story about sheep. Well, yeah, of course he does. When David says, kill the bastard that stole another man's sheep, Nathan says, well, big guy, that bastard is you. David says he's sorry, and boom, everything is okay again. Kind of like the prodigal son. I said, I'm sorry, Jehovah. We get a woman being assaulted who's being spied on as she takes baths. We get a guy an innocent guy killed. We get Jehovah killing the baby. But the leader of God's earthly organization, see governing body, just heads to the dining room and eats some food. But, well, the Bible did say that he changed his clothes first. Go read the account. It's right there. All of this only to realize that Seth Hyatt and the governing body don't seem to understand any of it, any of the story. You see, Jehovah himself, and Seth mentions it, breaks his own Mosaic law by not killing David. Well, would you look at that? What could the governing body learn from this? Is this what they did to Tony Morris? Where are you, Tony? Wait a minute. Jehovah broke his elevated thinking includes breaking his own laws? He didn't kill David? And then Seth reads 2 Samuel 12:13. Are you following along, by the way, with all of this wise reasoning by Seth Hyatt? 2 Samuel 12:13 says this, quote, David then said to Nathan, I have sinned against Jehovah. Nathan replied to David, Jehovah in turn forgives your sin. You will not die. End quote. That's it. That's it. Wait a minute. Where's the three elders? Wait, is there a judicial? What's happening? Wait, Seth Hyatt. A question from the audience. We're trying to get this elevated thinking down, and you seem to be focused on sinners and discipline and stuff. Is it really this easy in Jehovah's Witnesses? Sorry for all the dead people, the captive woman and how David was stalking her while she took a bath. Sorry that David's wives, he had many of them, by the way, that may have been hurt, or even his concubines. You know, when the wives aren't in the mood, you got to have a collection of concubines. You know, never mind any of them. Never mind. The point by the governing body in JW broadcast from October is this: you're showing Jehovah's Witnesses right from their Bibles that Jehovah's elevated thinking does not include any judicial process. It does not include 3 elders. It does not include a private or a public reproof, and it most certainly does not require a disfellowshipping or shunning or removal from the congregation. You just showed them. The Bible says David said, "Golly gee, I'm sorry." And Nathan said, "Yeah, okay." Are you sure you want to read this to Jehovah's Witnesses? This King David thing is just wild. But my favorite part of all of this, and who needs details, is in the very next verse. After establishing that David said he was sorry, there's no judicial process. Where that came from for Jehovah's Witnesses, let's not talk about that. Let's get elevated thinking and stuff. Forget all that. Seth neglects to read the next sentence of these verses from 2 Samuel 12, 13, and 14, where it says this, quote, "Nevertheless, because you have treated Jehovah with utter disrespect in this matter." Hold tight. Wait, what? Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I got to back up. I'm stunned. From the Bible, David's just stalked a woman, got people killed. Okay. 2 Samuel 12, 14. Seth doesn't want to read this one. I can't imagine why. Quote, "Nevertheless, because you have treated Jehovah with utter disrespect in this matter, the son just born to you will certainly die." End quote. Oh my. What? I certainly am seeing, I'm watching JW broadcasting, I'm sitting back in my chair, I got my Bible in my hand reading about the illustrious King David. I certainly see why I need to develop thinking just like Jehovah's. The most powerful man in the kingdom assaults another man's wife. He knocks her up. And well, you dear baby, well, Jehovah gave it some elevated thought, and he decided you should die for everything your father did. I mean, this Seth Hyatt and the governing body, you might want to flush out that writing committee. Are you sure you want to do this? Do you just expect Jehovah's Witnesses to be sitting there knowing how this organization operates and just be stupid? I mean, I recently saw a guy rip off my neighbor's car. So I found out where the thief lived. I followed him after he ripped off the car, and I went over to his house and I punched his 2-year-old in the face. That's what we were just read from the Bible. Very elevated thinking indeed, Seth Hyatt. Very elevated. All of this into a camera from people who donated the money for the camera to grown, thinking adults, and no one says a word. There's no questions. If you're a Jehovah's Witness here bravely listening, really? Are you sure this is the best example you could find in the entire Holy Book, Seth and governing body? In other words, if Samuel Hurd takes Gage Flegel's wife after watching her take baths for a test drive, are you guys going to find a random innocent kid in their congregation and beat him silly for what they did? Or worse, in David's situation? This is elevated thinking from Jehovah? It's moments like this, the 2025 October JW broadcast, I simply have to pinch myself. I can't believe I was ever a Jehovah's Witness. Even worse, I was on stage teaching this to people. I was the watchtower conductor for 8 years. This is what they put out there as sound logic, and most importantly, as spiritual food at the proper time. But Seth isn't done digging a hole for himself on camera. As people with brains watch and listen on, Seth says this, quote, "Well, what about Uriah, Bathsheba's husband? Did Jehovah forget Uriah? Please follow along as I read 2 verses," end quote. Oh my goodness, he's tying this together. David just said he's sorry, the baby died for it, but who cares? But what about the innocent husband who got killed by David? The 2 verses. The first one, 1 Kings chapter 15 and verse 5 of the New World Translation, which says, quote, "For David did what was right in the eyes of Jehovah, and he did not turn aside from anything that he had commanded him all the days of his life, except in the matter of Uriah the Hittite," end quote. Well, wait a minute. Time out. Time out. Seth Hyatt, governing body, JW broadcast, and 1 Kings 15:5. Are you sure, Seth? Are you sure that David never turned aside from anything he was commanded, except for Uriah? That time, yeah. What about the census sin? Are you familiar with it? It is called a sin, by the way. Seems like he turned aside there. How about the times he murdered women, children, and farm animals? Oh, never mind. I forgot. The God with the elevated thinking endorsed him doing that too. It's very elevated thinking, by the way. What about the time he slept with a hot virgin girl? She just cuddled him. What about the fact that he had multiple wives and concubines? Can we do that now? Staying home from the war, letting his troops go fight a war while he stalked Bathsheba taking a bath? What about that time? 1 Kings 15:5 says that David did what was right in Jehovah's eyes his entire life, that he never turned aside from anything. And then it gives the disclaimer, except for Uriah, that is. Remember that? He had that guy killed so he could sleep with his wife. Wow. Only one mistake his entire life. There are tens of thousands that may beg to differ, but many of them David killed or had killed when he made mistakes. What an incredible example we're getting here. And I feel my thinking elevating. It's just elevating with each word out of Seth Hyatt's mouth. This is how the governing body thinks and speaks of and to Jehovah's Witnesses. They're all just dumb. They're just nodding along. But are you ready? Folks, we aren't done with this whole elevated thinking like Jehovah thing yet. He then takes us to the second verse he remembers after asking us if Jehovah just forgot about Uriah. How sad. Did he just forget about what David did to Uriah? He takes us to something I'd never considered that had me laughing so hard. I'm going to try to keep it together, okay? I'm really going to try. That's the best I can do. He takes us to Matthew chapter 1 and verse 6 of the New World Translation, where he says this, quote, "Jesse became father to David the king. David became father to Solomon by the wife of Uriah," end quote. Oh no! Seth Hyatt, governing body, writing committee, pull it together. Wait a minute. Do you know what you just read us from the Bible? He stops after reading that and says, well, what's the point? And I got to tell you, I couldn't wait for his answer. He says, quote, "Did Jehovah forgive David? Yes, but Jehovah has never forgotten Uriah," end quote. And I burst out dying with laughter. I hope you're following this reasoning on the JW broadcast from October 2025 on elevated thinking, just like Jehovah does himself. You see, let's summarize. Jehovah's main guy on earth, King David, spies on your wife, gets naked with her, and has you killed at war. A war he should have been at himself, but decided to stick back to watch the bath. But let's elevate our thinking here. Seth wants us to know that Jehovah didn't forget Uriah. In fact, as you just saw from those two verses, my favorite being Matthew 1:6, he gives Uriah an all-time, all-world shout-out in the Bible itself by low-key embarrassing him for all of eternity and mentioning that David went on to have a son named Solomon by, as the Bible says, the very wife David stole from our guy Uriah. Isn't that amazing? Thank you, Seth Hyatt. Jehovah's elevated thinking. He didn't forget Uriah. He put a billboard up mentioning that David had you killed and then went on to have a life of naked luxury with your wife and had a son named Solomon. Doesn't even mention Uriah. You cannot make up the stupidity of these guys. Some guy is sleeping with your wife. You're dead. And he wants us to think that Jehovah's elevated thinking is that, well, Jehovah did mention you personally as the guy that made it all possible for David when he stole your wife and had you killed and had a guy named Solomon as a baby. I mean, come on, folks. A shout out in the Bible is just that. A huge honor, even if it's a grotesquely embarrassing shout out. Not that Uriah even knows, but well, we do. Wouldn't Uriah be happy to know Jehovah didn't forget him by reminding the universe that he is in fact dead? David was banging his wife, and they had another kid together. And by the way, just a reminder, Solomon's mommy used to be Uriah's wife. Matthew chapter 1 and verse 6. And I heard it in the distance. I'm sorry. Forgive me in advance. Solomon's wife has got it going on. And sorry, his mom. Solomon's mom has got it going on. And all of this is portrayed to Jehovah's Witness in this broadcast as elevated thinking. Really? But just when you thought he was done with all this, Seth Hyatt goes completely off the rails by saying this. Keep digging that hole, Brother Hyatt. I'm sure the sinners are all running back to Kingdom Halls, even as we speak. Even when none of this, anything he shared in this broadcast, applies to what goes on in a modern-day congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses. But Brother Hyatt continues by saying this, quote, I'm going to take a deep breath. Okay. He says, quote, in the new world. Okay, and quote for a minute. Oh no, don't do it, Seth, don't. Let me help you. Stop here. In the new world. Oh, what's coming next? He continues. Seth, by the way, he starts by saying, quote, in the new world, and this is where he exposes himself. This is where he exposes that he himself and the people who wrote this, that's the writing committee, and the governing body who approved it, they don't understand their own doctrines, folks, their own teachings. They don't understand their own teachings. He goes on to say, quote, in the new world, Jehovah will execute perfect justice when he resurrects Uriah, and how we all look forward to being there to welcome him, end quote, me included. I can confirm, I would love to be there when Uriah pops up. In my time as a Jehovah's Witness, my list of people in the resurrection I couldn't wait to meet went something like this. I know it'll shock no one. Number one, you got it, my guy Noah. So many questions. Number two, don't have time to expand on this, John the Baptist. But I got a few questions for him about Jesus. Anyway, and then third, and I'm not kidding, folks, this is not just because of this episode, I couldn't wait to meet Uriah. And so it gave me the willies when he said this. In an effort to teach us to elevate our thinking to be like Jehovah's, Seth seems to have missed a few very important things about Jehovah's Witnesses. Inevitable things they teach that is in print, that they all believe, that they have public talks and watchtower studies on. He just told us that, hey, it's going to all work out. Uriah's going to be resurrected in the new world. It'll be great. But Seth, let me give you 3 things to chew on that you might want to take back, and I look forward to you removing the 2025 October JW broadcast at your earliest convenience. How about this? Seth, my guy, this means, this New World Resurrection thing, means that King David will get to face Uriah in person. How do you suppose that conversation's going to go? Hey, buddy, sorry about having you killed back in the day. You see, I was on my rooftop checking out your wife, and despite having a few women to choose from myself, I just had to have her. I had to have your wife. Yeah, by the way, we went on to have a few kids. One of them's named Solomon. It's pretty cool. You get a shout out at Matthew 1:6 as being the guy that got killed when I stole your wife. Oh, and those kids, because of Solomon and my family tree, they led to the guy in heaven named Jesus, who, by the way, just resurrected you. Our elevated thinking God, I just want to point out here, this is a Bible. Let me hand it to you. This is your shout out in Matthew 1:6. Check it out. It says that, she used to be your wife and we had a kid named Solomon. No hard feelings? What? Seth Hyatt, what? The new world? The new world when he's resurrected. Yeah, that's going to be a hell of a meeting. And I'm not kidding when I expose myself. I used to think about that conversation between David and Uriah a lot. A lot. I may have even worked it into a public talk. I don't remember. But how about this? How about a second thing to chew on? You said that Jehovah in the new world will be exercising perfect justice. Dear Seth, you do realize that you guys, that is Jehovah's Witnesses in the governing body, teach the planet that resurrected people won't be able to marry or get naked with someone special ever again throughout all of eternity. Do you realize that? This is perfect justice? This is perfect justice for our guy Uriah? I'm thinking personally, if you want to exercise perfect justice, and I'm elevating my thinking according to the theme here, that Uriah should have his pick of the hottest girls in paradise. Maybe a hot pioneer sister or something. But, that to me sounds like justice. But I don't know, Seth. Getting murdered, cheated on, and then embarrassed in the Bible that people will have forever doesn't really sound like justice to me, whether you're in paradise with a fruit bowl or not. Is that justice? Anyone else? Am I alone on this? I can't wait to see comments. Perfect justice, huh, Seth? This elevated thinking thing is getting hard. But how about a third? Finally, this. Since we're on this subject of elevated thinking this month, can we overlook Uriah laughing at David when the former king also finds out he gets to live forever as a celibate man surrounded by perfect, beautiful women? Hey, David, this is justice. Look, but don't touch, bro. We're in the same boat. Even as Bathsheba wanders by. Seth Hyatt and the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses. Just dribble it out on camera. Don't think about it. And Uriah, I stalked your wife. I got her naked. I impregnated her multiple times. And with Jehovah's elevated thinking, he was sure to erect a universal billboard known as the Bible that will never be taken down, reminding everyone that opens its pages, the entire universe, that I, King David, am having babies with your wife Isn't this great? Now we're both single forever. Okay, I'm repeating myself. I can't get over it. I just can't get over this. I'll say it again, and I've been more blunt as of late. These guys are so dumb. This whole thing is to get us to think like Jehovah thinks. That's the whole purpose of the JW broadcast. And that they want sinners to come back to the kingdom hall. And inspiring us to think like Jehovah and get all these people back. Let's use King David as an example. So you Jehovah's Witnesses out there, you need to forgive people that have destroyed your life. Think like Jehovah. I mean, look at David and Uriah, I guess. Look what happened to Uriah. This is going to turn out so great in the future. This is going to be great. Ugh. The elevated thinking of the governing body and poor brother Seth Hyatt, if I've been saying his name wrong the whole time, probably, concludes the portion of the broadcast by telling us to, you guessed it, how we should all apply all of this and match Jehovah's elevated thinking when it comes to sinning, how we treat returning sinners, and so much more. The problem in the end with all of this is that Jehovah's organization doesn't remotely match what his own son taught on forgiving sinners. Again, see the prodigal son. See a past episode. But Brother Hyatt, Wyatt, whatever he is, tells us to keep, quote, climbing that mountain to get access to Jehovah's elevated thinking. And all I could think by the end of this portion of this broadcast was, thanks for the laughs, Seth. Thank you. I'm going to summarize the rest of this month's broadcast with this. The JW broadcast from October moves on rapidly and into a feature and experience a life of one of their lawyers. I'm not kidding. And I got to tell you, this is a developing theme now with this organization. They're really putting their lawyers out there. We're introduced to Jim McCabe. Maybe some of you know him, where we hear his story in his own words. From a worldly lawyer who went to college in San Diego. Imagine, during the same time, of course, Jehovah's Witnesses were told they can't go to college. That's all changed. Jim McCabe took a Bible study, practiced law, he became a pioneer, and in 1984 and 1985, he accepted an invitation to Brooklyn, Bethel, to do to work in construction. What? Why? But rest assured, it didn't last long. And that's the message for all those young professionals out there that they want to get with your skills and free labor. He was reassigned to, you guessed it, the legal department. I'm just summarizing this now. But the part of this interview that stood out to me was his wife, Melissa, stating that they moved back to Bethel as a family, including their kids, with their oldest son being assigned to the factory, this is in the 80s, folks, at 16 years old. No. Is this kid in school? He's 16. She goes on to say that his little brothers went with mom to the laundry every morning. What? I mean, child labor laws be damned, huh? This is on camera. Brother McCabe continues by saying that they only litigate, by the way, as lawyers, to give a witness to the world about Jehovah and his elevated thinking. Sure, Jim. It certainly has nothing to do with the avalanche of CSA lawsuits that have really gained steam and began to crop up post-1980s. We then get shots of the elderly couple walking along the beach in designer sunglasses. Very weird. We're sent back to Seth Hyatt Wyatt, who tells us to read Jim's entire story in the February 8th, 1987 Awake. And I'm going to move on. But it was fascinating to hear the whole family was back there in Brooklyn at the time, and they got a 16-year-old working in the factory. I don't think this should be on film. That's my take. The broadcast then takes us to some young brothers that went to prison in South Africa. We can't go a month without seeing some persecution highlights, videos, and a big dose of fear. So we get South Africa this month. It's then on to one of my favorite segments. I'm not going there, called Dig for Treasures. I'm wondering if they dug for the treasure about David, Uriah, and what happened there. Never mind, which is all based in this month on the book of Amos. We get more talks and stuff, but I'm burnt out. Allow me to whisk you away as we conclude to this month's music video entitled A Higher Kind of Love. I thought for a minute I heard Steve Winwood in the background. I'm not going to sing again. I don't know how these things see the light of day. And this one might be the most appalling and stupid one yet. I mean, from the jingle, the lyrics, my God, is it bad. For example, here's the chorus, quote, "You are my sister, you are my brother, you are my father, you are my mother. It's a higher kind of love." Okay, I'm going to stop. It's beyond bad. But aside from the horrible music, it's the video itself that jumped out at me. I'd love to get other people's opinions. We get yet another music video that seems to be aimed at Asian people. And I'm noticing this as a theme now. It doesn't look like a coincidence to me anymore. From some of the talks, dramas, videos, music videos, it really seems like they're targeting Jehovah's Witnesses or the population in Asian countries. And maybe it's because they're so populous and they're trying to get members. I don't know. But it seems very conspicuous to me. We don't get a lot of Latin America. We get some Africa when they want to show us how lucky we have it. But a lot of Asian stuff. And I really wonder if this is a strategic move by the organization. Just a note. But finally, this incredible spiritual feast known as the JW Broadcast of October ends with this month's country highlights, and it's from Nicaragua. Seth Hyatt tells us, quote, "The truth arrived in Nicaragua in 1934, end quote. And immediately, it only took Jesus, I guess, around 15 years to get his message to Central America as the newly enthroned king in 1914. Don't know. Seth tells us that the people of Nicaragua are elevated by Jehovah's pure worship. I see what you did there. And with that, folks, I'm done. I know I meander. Another JW broadcast ends in 2025. In this case, it was all about you and I developing elevated thinking to match Jehovah. And after all Seth Hyatt brought to us in this 2025 October broadcast, he seems to have forgotten a very key detail from the book written for his anointed bosses, the Bible. Every time he's said to have elevated thinking like Jehovah, I frowned. I just kind of frowned. I hit the pause button a few times and I stared out the window. I mean, does Seth and his bosses remember this? From 1 Corinthians chapter 2 and verse 16 of the New World Translation, we are told, quote, "Who has come to know the mind of Jehovah that he may instruct him? But we do have the mind of Christ," end quote. You see, we can try to elevate our thinking to Jehovah's way of thinking all we want, but the Bible seems to indicate it's a bit futile. We will never know the mind of Jehovah. I don't know, but it seems like the Bible says we know how Jehovah thinks only, according to 1 Corinthians 2:16, by looking at Jesus. Oh, okay. I got it now. If I look at Jesus, I can elevate my thinking to Jehovah's way of thinking. Look, as I look at King Jesus Christ of Jehovah's Witnesses, I've learned a few things. I learned he can teach the wrong doctrines for many years. People might even die. I've learned that he ignores the safety of children in his kingdom halls. I've learned that he leaves people in prisons. I've learned that he gets rid of his old thoughts. I've learned that he builds movie studios. Ah, yes. Very, very elevated thinking. I want to thank you for bearing with me this week. Wherever you may be, I'm thinking about you. Be well.